Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture on poverty and development planning. This lecture is a part of your paper on development communication. In this module, you shall deal with what poverty is, what causes it and what kind of development planning can help its reduction. This module will give you a multidisciplinary approach to understand the connection between development planning with its various aspects and poverty reduction. Through the analysis of the various projects and programs of the economic models used at both micro and macro levels, this chapter will assess the distributive impacts and scopes of development interventions in poverty reduction. We are seeking a multidisciplinary approach as it will provide a more multi-layered and composite depiction of what may be involved in planning for development by reducing poverty at all levels. Poverty is a very common and widely discussed issue today. It refers to a condition of living found mostly in developing and the underdeveloping nations of the world. It not only retards but also devastates the factors in human life. It is a pandemic that greatly affects the society and stands as a barrier to the sustainable development of a country. Although the developing countries have shown a certain aggregate growth in the last few years, however, the benefits of such economic growth have reached the poor in a very limited degree. As a result, the income of the poor has not an impressive increase. In fact, it is much less than the average. Poverty being a burning issue at present, many a policy has been proposed to counter it. But it appears to be a long drawn condition which cannot be eradicated with a short period of time. Different economic development policies have been planned and executed with substantial results. Consistent and long-term effective policies aiming at yielding healthy and better educated labor force is what can reduce poverty. So, the main objective of this module is to have a deeper understanding of the development planning aimed at the eradication of poverty. Poverty in a developing nation. We are all acquainted with the term poverty. Much has been said and interpreted about it, but a concrete idea of this condition is required for understanding the relevance and related challenges of the development policies. Poverty in the simplest term is the state of an individual when he lacks means to provide himself with the basic necessities of life. You are well aware what we mean by basic necessities. We refer to the basic needs such as food, clothing and shelter, and all these facilities are largely lacking in remote areas where the condition is chronic. Poverty has several dimensions from socio-economic perspectives. Poverty may be absolute, relative, situational or chronic. Absolute poverty is acute in its kind and may be characterized by the chronic lack of basic food, drinking water, good health and housing. It is long-term in nature and often passes down generations. Relative poverty occurs when a certain section of people are not in a condition to enjoy a certain living standards in comparison to the remaining population. In spite of access to support rendered by government with regard to food, water, medicine and free housing, they are considered poor because they fail to enjoy the superior services availed by the community. Situational poverty may be defined as created due to several disasters like earthquakes, floods or serious illness. If given proper assistance, this situation may be overcome. Generational poverty is the situation faced by individuals or families over generations. It is usually very difficult to escape such conditions as people are trapped in its clutches and hardly can access tools which can free them from their condition. Apart from this, poverty has other dimensions too. It is not only the absence of basic necessities that makes a person poor, but also not receiving education, not being able to find oneself a minimum earning, not being able to pay for medication and marginalization that make a man poor. So, by now you can well comprehend that poverty includes social, economic and political elements. Dimensions of poverty might be many, but all are interlinked and implies deprived conditions of people. It varies depending on situations and from place to place. As mentioned earlier, definition of poverty may be many, but what is certain is that it is a complex issue in any society and hence calls for immediate attention. It had been a major issue to resolve for the United Nations and the World Bank. We shall now elaborately discuss about the various economic policies and their impact that aim at reduction of poverty in third world countries. These policies are mostly income based and hence we shall learn how the GDP or gross domestic product of a country affects the poor. Economic policies and developmental planning for poverty reduction. Stabilization in macroeconomy. Sustained economic growth can to a large extent pull out the deprived from their state of poverty. Poverty in fact depends upon two factors: the average level of income of the nation and the degree of equality in its distribution. Therefore, we understand that if a country's average income is not equally distributed, the gap between the rich and the poor shall widen at greater degrees. Exclusion of long-term reforms in the society. Reforms implemented in the society in favor of the deprived can also raise the rate of growth which rightly can control poverty. Thus, a long-term successful program of stabilization can to a considerable extent help in alleviation of poverty. Now, you may be wondering about how short-term reforms affect the same. If reforms are short-term, when the total income of the country contracts, the condition of the poor largely depends on the structure of the economy in the respective country. The way the government would respond in protecting public expenditure that would benefit the poor can distinctly affect the improvement of the deprived class. Shifting relative price. Most stabilization programs are in normal necessitated by a balance of payments crisis. The price shift that is required is a real exchange rate depreciation, which hints at a rise in traded relative to non-traded prices. The poor in this regard are affected on the basis of whether they are net producers or net consumers of traded and non-traded goods. If they are net consumers and have to buy consumable articles on balance, they are very likely to lose on price shifts, whereas if they are net producers, they gain. Again, if they are net producers of non-traded goods, for example, providing services to the people in the urban areas, they will certainly lose from the price shift and gain if they are net consumers. Employment structure of an economy again plays an inevitable role in this. A change in employment. The employment of the poor may be affected when there is a reduction in aggregate demand in a country, which may in all probability reduce labor demand. In such cases, situations like loss of job, low wages, low part-time earning may be created. Nonetheless, if the supply of export materials responds positively to the changed relative prices, then there are chances of jobs getting created for unskilled workers. Distressed sale of assets. Pathetic sales of assets occur during inflation. The poor who already possess very few assets may witness a reduction in value of such assets during inflation. During such economic crisis, the poor may resort to the sale of a few assets he possesses, like livestock or land, or he may withdraw children from school to maintain short-term household consumption. Such sales in no way can be profitable, rather it is so distressed that it impedes the growth of the household in future and pushes the poor into long-term poverty. Effect of public expenditure on social programs. Stabilization is commonly said to be in close association with the expenses made by the public on social programs. Such kind of expenditure in fact necessitates control and reduction, for it plausibly can affect poverty. There are chances of the expenditures getting leaked to the non-poor if not kept at a constant check. In such a scenario, the poor are deprived from their benefits. On the other hand, if social expenditures aim at providing the needs of the poor, namely primary health care, basic education and food at subsidized rates, the poor can distinctly benefit from such kind of expenditures. Hence, these points make it clear that a number of factors influence the stabilization of economy. It can in no way be consistent and static. The mentioned parameters would decide whether the economy would show any positive results to the poor or not. So, what we mainly get here is that there is a clear correlation between economic stability and poverty reduction. Let us now consider how far macro stabilization has influenced a respective economy. Impact of macro stabilization in alleviating poverty. The effect of stabilization in the macroeconomic level can be well assessed when we consider what the condition of the poor would have been without reforms. In order to understand the true connection between poverty and economic policy, what is required is a form of economic modeling that may affect alternative policies and test their impact on poverty and other social issues. However, most schemes of this type have in fact indicated that macro policies actually adopted had a weak effect on the poor in the short run. Developing nations are adapting to the alternative mix in policies for better results in favor of the poor. There also have been cases that showed relative price shifts associated with economic reforms have indeed boosted a distribution in income and has certainly freed many from the poverty level. For example, African economies of the 1980s suggest that since the tradable goods sector focused on being rural and labor based, it not only generated jobs but also raised income for the rural poor. Thus, what is clear from these facts is that poverty consequences of macroeconomic policies cannot be generalized. Now, we will be analyzing how the different factors of production like land, labor, credit and foreign trade can affect poverty in any economy. We all know that most developing and underdeveloping nations are agriculture based, yet the poor suffer from a lack of access to land. If there is a high return per hectare on small unit of farm, redistribution and resettlement may show possibilities on both equity and efficiency grounds. But major land distribution can be hardly seen other than the decades of defeats and rebellions. In a continent like Asia, there is scarcity of land, so it becomes a prerequisite to raise productivity on the cultivable land. Although owner cultivation takes place, but the poor are hardly landowners. Most of these are landless casual workers who are paid very low wages, and it is a challenge for them to meet the daily requirements of living. The landless casual laborers can only see an improvement in their economic condition provided they graduate to become eligible permanent workers in order to have a regular access to land. If large farm units can be divided into smaller units and given on agreeable rents, then tenants have a greater chance to farm on the subplots and thereby earn themselves better living conditions. Poverty is directly affected by the change in employment conditions in a country. Various discussions on policies have aimed at increasing labor employment, reducing the rigidities which may arise due to lacking information, trade union activities or minimum wage legislation of the government. However, such policies can be implemented in urban areas, but in rural farms, where we don't find influence of the trade unions on casual workers, they need to be paid standardized wages. Sometimes farming and cultivation also seems to be seasonal, which lead to the unemployment of the casual laborers for long periods, moving them towards the poverty line. Hence, it becomes important to implement policies which may ensure the employment of the casual laborers throughout the year. Various policies to alleviate poverty have channelized funding to the poor. In the past, such programs had often shown loopholes in their implementation, as the funds often leaked to the non-poor sectors. Informal sector creditors were not easily accessible by the poor because of extreme charges that led to high administrative costs of lending minimum amounts. Over the last 15 years, a significant spread in the microfinance institutions are facilitating smooth consumption and building up of reproductive assets. These institutions today exist in most countries, and shockingly, the estimated borrowers of such loans are huge. The microfinance institutions make use of a variety of mechanisms before lending loans. Local officials or dignitaries are used to scrutinize applicants. Borrower groups are used to monitor repayment, offering large loans to good repayment makers and resorting to compulsory saving deposits as insurance against defaults. Overall, such microfinance schemes have greatly benefited the poor in crisis situations and in facilitating finance to purchase assets, both physical and human. These points clarify how land, labor, and credit are related to the growth of the resource employed in the agricultural field. Now, we shall discuss how liberalized foreign trade can affect poverty. Increasing foreign trade leads to capital inflow in a country. Open exposure to foreign marketing, technology, and management can enhance the chances of a better economic growth of a country. It is believed that the impact of such growth can be a blessing to poverty in the respective country. This is likely to increase employment opportunities through the expansion of labor-intensive tradable activities. Considerable efforts have been taken to establish trade reforms. At macroeconomic level, these reforms appear to be positive, but not at every instance. Due to the resource reallocation that is generated by trade reforms, there may be job losses in previously secure activities faced by the poor. However, adjustment costs in such job losses have been humble. So, by a thorough reading of the points cited above, you know that poverty is a wide concept which is dependent upon many elements. It is therefore of prime importance to understand that the poor should share a justified proportion of the average growth in an economy. Assurance of such share requires certain safety measures which can safeguard the interest of the poor. Let us now discuss what these safety nets can shape to be. Safety nets in development planning for the poor. Safety nets are predominantly seen dealing with the impact of adverse shocks that are responsible in causing transitory poverty. Long-term or chronic poverty can be reduced by the building up of human capital. Government support can play a vital role in this by helping to reduce the risks of adverse impact, and this in turn will help the poor to undertake higher risks and higher return activities that can alleviate them from their poverty level. It targets public assistance at well-defined groups who are mostly elements below the poverty line. The two alternatives in this case are indicator and self-targeting. The first mentioned may be a proxy for the presence of poverty, which may include residence in a particular area, non-ownership of land, gender, state of nutrition, size of the household, and pregnancy. Those sufficing the characteristics will be provided with particular forms of social support. Self-targeting, on the other hand, may not act as a substitution, because the one in the better condition will not avail the facility provided, either because of low wages or because it involves physical labor. In this connection, it is important to remain cautious that leakage to the non-poor again may not benefit the poor. This is called targeting error, which also may arise with the exclusion of a few poor groups. According to World Bank in 2000, there are 7 main types of safety net. Pensions and other forms of old age assistance, unemployment benefits, health insurance, employment or workfare programs, social funds, microfinance schemes, cash transfers. Employment or workfare policies seek to offer income for work at the time of household crisis. This offers employment to the poor at a wage below the ongoing market rate to ensure that it is rendered only to the poor with very limited opportunities for alternative earning activity. Social funds, which are not very common in Asia, are used commonly in other regions. Very little do we know about its distribution of its beneficiaries are available. However, more flexibility in the amount of loans being lent and reaching into areas of individuals rather than group lending perhaps can achieve better results in this. Cash transfers are very rarely used as safety nets, for they involve the high risk of corruption and leakage to the non-poor. Hence, these may be used indirectly to reduce the cost of essential items for the poor. Therefore, we see how safety nets can secure the poor against economic and natural mishaps. Their effects can be ever more effective if they can be viewed as part of regular functioning of policy. However, it is a disappointing fact that most governments in Asian countries are ill prepared to meet crises during natural or economic disasters due to inadequate safety nets. What we learned from this chapter is that development planning must aim at ensuring a share of the nation's profit for the poor. The main conclusion that we can draw from this module is that a number of developmental planning has been resorted to in order to fight against poverty. We also learned that a consistent, stabilized economy and long-term social reforms can play a pivotal role in the economic upliftment of the poor. Nevertheless, certain influences on the economy, on the contrary, may pose to be a hindrance to such reforms. The different policies and planning depend on a number of factors in any economy of a country. We now know that various measures have been implemented time and again, yet a lot needs to be initiated to increase the economic growth of a country to witness a considerable measure in the alleviation of poverty. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the module carefully and attempt the questions at the end. Thank you.